Welcome to Waiting on the Trade, a monthly comics book club for people who can't keep up with monthly comics. I'm Matt Ledger.
I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck.
And I am Catherine Prince.
This month, we're talking about Barrier by Brian K. Vaughan, Marcos Martin, and Muntza Vicente. Now, in case y'all need a refresher, Barrier is a sci-fi tale featuring lead characters who speak different languages, and it uses that conceit as a springboard for exploring how communication affects our empathy for other people, or beings, or whatever everyone is in this thing. So before we get too far into this, how long have we all been sick? I'll go first. I've been almost 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, 2 weeks for me, roughly, last Saturday. Sickness hit me.
Kat, when did I infect you?
Last Thursday. Well, I mean, before then, there's an incubation period of several days, but I got sick last Thursday and have been sick since.
Nice.
So, Kat, it's your second time on the podcast. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Kat, where did you find out about this wonderful comic that explores the boundaries between human relations through the medium of science fiction?
Oh my God, this comic. Yes. I am not a weekly comics buyer, and I'm not interested in investing in long stories that way. So this story right here was my very first foray into buying single issues as they come out.
Nice.
And this was in, correct me if I'm wrong here, 2018. This came out over the course
2018.
I said, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt.
Oh, I'm sorry. Asserting that you were right. I apologize.
That's good to know. Okay, yeah. So 2018, over the course of 5 weeks, starting on Free Comic Book Day. And my goodness, the first issue was the best Free Comic Book Day ever. It was a full, huge issue and not just like a piece of a story or snippets or something that was written hastily. It was like, wow, this was a legitimate Free Comic Book Day.
This is a pretty heavy comic for a Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mess around. It's only got 5 issues to say what it's going to say. And I guess, so I chose this thinking that somewhere out there in the world, these 5 issues were compiled into a trade. And as we have learned, and you, dear readers out there in Radio Land, may soon learn if you decide to pick this up, they're not.
There's no such thing.
There's no trade. Yeah, they're just loose.
And it violates the central conceit of the podcast, and we can't review it. That's the end of the show. Bye.
Matt's been really excited to say that bit. He's practiced it a couple times.
I have. I've had it in my notes for the last month since we were going to record, and then we all got sick, and then we were going to record again.
Yep.
Yeah, so fair warning, this is not technically a trade. But, I mean, if you hold them all together and you put them into a binder or something, they feel like they could be. They're the same size.
So I looked this up, actually, and we're going to talk about, so we have the single issues, we have the Free Comic Book Day version of number 1, and then the normal versions of 2 through 5 in our house, right? I think they're sitting next to Kat right now, technically. So we have those. There's a non-Free Comic Book Day version of number 1, so if you missed it in Free Comic Book Day, or you just want to be a completionist like me, because I'm eventually going to buy it, I'm sure, get one that's the same size, because the Free Comic Book Day one's on slightly cheaper paper and it's slightly smaller dimensions to the rest of them. So someday I'll probably buy the collector's edition of number 1, just because my brain won't be able to handle it being a different size and different paper stock for the rest of my life. It won't, it doesn't compute.
Sure, yeah. Uh-huh.
There's also a slipcase edition you can buy, which is the closest thing there is to a physical trade, where you can buy a slipcase that comes with all 5 issues individually.
What's a slipcase?
So it's just basically a nice little box that you can put all 5 single issues in.
Well, why don't you just buy 5 issues and then put them in your own box?
You could do that. You absolutely could. The other way you can get it as a complete edition is you can buy it digitally, which I think is what you ended up having to do, Pat, because at this point the slipcase thing is out of print. You can buy it on eBay or Amazon or whatever, but I think it's done essentially.
Yeah, no, I bought it digitally.
I guess talking about them all compiled, and the way that you read them, Pat, is completely different than the way that I read them. And part of the reason that I picked this comic is because, like I said, this is my first foray into a weekly issue, and I Wow, I was really excited every week when it was time to buy Barrier. And that's something I'd never actually experienced with comics before because I don't read a whole lot of the mainstream superhero comics. I'm more about like self-contained stories with unique characters that haven't been franchised too much.
Sure.
So yeah, I guess your reading experience was, I'm assuming, in one sitting, right?
It was, yes. The PDF is 190 pages, and it's all 5 issues.
Okay. Sounds like a trade to me. But
I mean, it sort of is, right? So here's a question for you, Pat, that you may or may not want to answer. How much did you pay for it?
Well, I bought it off of Brian K. Vaughan and I'm sorry, I can't remember the other guy's name.
Marcos Martin?
Yes, their website, which is
Panel Syndicate.
yes, I bought it off of their site, and it's pay what you want, basically. So I had the option. I could get it for free if I really wanted to, but I didn't feel that was fair. I paid $10 for my 5 issues.
Okay. That's a decent deal. I mean, like, that's the thing. When I went to go look it up, I was like, oh, I knew you could pay what you wanted on it, but I assumed there was like some sort of minimum price, but it's literally
No,
free to whatever
if
you
you
want
leave
to
it
pay.
blank, you could get it for free if you really want to, but it's definitely worth paying something for it because it's a quality comic book.
Yeah. So it was actually super cool because I like Kat and I go to Free Comic Book Day together. I think most of the times that I've gone since we've been dating/married, honestly. And I'm like a big sucker for the usual big two nostalgia nonsense, but Kat's just there to get a good story, right?
Mhm.
And so I can depend on her to grab the good comics while I grab the stuff that I would always grab. So I was like super excited because especially on like Free Comic Book Day, usually they give you like a certain number of comics you're allowed to leave with, which is totally legit. Makes sense. Like you don't want someone to just step in, take 20 free comics and leave and not have bought anything, right?
Sure.
So I depend on Kat sometimes to get the good stuff while I get the Marvel and DC stuff. So it was super cool to see you, Kat, get excited about a comic that you knew you could get the next piece of the very next week. Because monthly comics don't have that. You like have to go every month, and it's enough time to wait in between that. Like, especially if things get busy, you might lose track of what you're doing, and the momentum slows down, and you don't go again. And like we had to go. I don't think for this one, but for You Are Deadpool, which was coming out at the same time and you also liked, and it was weekly because we couldn't find them at various shops. Like we had to go from shop to shop, and it's like the most regular comic book experience I think I've had since college, actually. Like where I was in the comic book shop every single week trying to track down these issues so that I could bring them home so that we could read them.
And it would be
So
interesting to see what the sales numbers said from 2018 when these actually came out. But to me, it kind of felt like it turned comics buying as it's traditionally done these days on its head, where it's just like, okay, same characters, you have to wait every week, and like maybe you have a physical issue at a comic store that they pull for you. But I think there's really something to be said by these short, self-contained stories that last like maybe between a month or two, and then you're done, and you have you know, maybe you don't have those characters ever come back into a serial run again. I think that's really what kept me coming back, like knowing that there was going to be an end. And it allowed the artists and the writers to have probably a little bit more freedom with it because they're not like, okay, well, I've got to make sure that I leave it for the next guy to be able to pick up. And then you end up writing yourself into a corner and like, okay, how do we bring him back from the dead this time?
well,
Well,
this book too. Oh, go ahead, Pat.
no, I was saying I read some articles about this, interviews with Brian K. Vaughan, and ironically, he expressed the same thing you were saying, Kat, that he
Oh,
really appreciates this story, that it's a complete, separate, encapsulated story with these characters who he enjoyed writing, but he has no interest in revisiting them. Like the story that they had is complete, especially the ending. I don't know, you couldn't really continue from that. That would feel, I don't know, silly after such an ending to this story. But it's sort of ironic because the other big series that Brian K. Vaughan is known for is Saga, which is living up to its name. And I have no, Matt, you said there is actually a number of volumes now. They said that they're going to stop after a while.
I think so. I think it's about halfway right now, and they're coming back sometime this year. But I might dig up that information for the show notes because I gotta double check it.
Because
Honestly,
I need to reread it because I have no idea where that story's at anymore. I've completely lost the thread. So I sort of chuckled when he said, "Yeah, I really appreciate stories that have an ending." It's like, yeah, Brian, I do too. Could you get
I
on
mean,
that?
most of his stuff actually ends satisfactorily. Like Paper Girls is one of his that I'll probably recommend at the end of this for reasons, and like that
Sure.
wrapped up last year. Pride of Baghdad's another one that's like, I think that's just a one shot. Honestly, that's a Brian K. Vaughan thing too. So like he's actually pretty good at ending stuff.
Well, Why the Last Man also has an ending, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Kat, what was that?
I was going to say earlier, though, like you absolutely could pick it up where it ended, but I really like the fact that they don't, and it sounds like they don't intend to, because a story with a little bit of an ambiguous ending, I think, is a lot more interesting. Like it allows you to have a sense of imagination and think about it afterwards and not necessarily have to know everything. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it gives space for the readers to imagine what they think the actual ending would be. Well, I mean, it's also the irony of the last bit of these two characters who haven't been able to communicate because of the language barrier, finally getting to understand each other on like such a personal level, and then being brought back from such an alien environment to Earth, their home, and yet it's still because it's Islamic people speaking a different language. Like, oh God, we still are the same problem that we had to begin with,
Right.
even
Like
when we were in
there's a
space.
KFC, and that's about it for things that are
They're so
recognizable.
close to being home, and yet it's great.
I thought that had some interesting ecological implications too for like I think a lot of people might not think about it like, oh, I bought a turtle or a goldfish at the store. I want it at the fair and I don't really want it. I'm just gonna release it into the wild. Like, no, that's not gonna live. You can't just put your guinea pig in the woods and expect it to be okay.
Well, it's also just it's a interesting comment on what is universal for our planet. Like, what is planet wide? KFC was like, oh my God, we made it back home, and yet it's
Right.
not quite
That's
home.
the thing that's like, oh, it's Earth.
Or in the spaceship, Liddy finds a can of Coke and shares it.
Since we're talking a little bit more about, the characters' names and what they do, should we dive a little bit more into the content here? Do you guys usually do
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I like going through the plot. And
We have
Matt
an ongoing
is opposed
argument
to
about
it.
how deep we need to dive into the
you do
actual
like
plot itself.
a review of the premise of the story or the nitty-gritty details or what?
Yeah, Matt, what?
I mean, that's your show, Pat. Yeah, we could go through from 1 to 5 quickly if we wanted to.
Well, before we start, you guys have physical copies of this, and I'm wondering because the digital one, it's all landscape. So I'm wondering.
It's all landscape. So it's all printed in like in the like a normal comic book, you'd flip it open from the cover to the left, and the first page is like on the right or whatever. It's top
the
to
top
bottom.
and the bottom.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Which is sweet, right? Like I feel like there are so many cool tricks in here that you could like. Part of the reason I would hate for there to be a sequel to this is I think you only get to get away with some of those tricks once, but they're all really neat.
That's cool. Yeah, we could. I don't know, Matt. Now you got me second guessing my feelings of going through the story.
I mean, so the first issue is kind of like the setup. We meet both characters. Eventually, their worlds collide, and then there's aliens. Like that's the first issue, right?
When you guys first read this, did you have any inkling that it would jump to science fiction so suddenly at the end of this issue?
I usually read the ending last, so I did not know.
Wow, shots fired. I did not know either, even though I do often flip to the end of a book first because I'm a monster.
Because reading the first issue, I definitely I understand what this book is like. Oh, I know what's going to happen. It's telling the two personal stories of people from different parts of the world, but it's a human story. They're both still like they're dealing with personal struggles and that kind of like, oh shit, no, that's a spaceship. This is taking a turn that I was not prepared for.
But it's completely set up, right? In the initial ha ha ha, they're aliens joke. Like they literally are aliens, though.
It's like, no, they're not aliens. It's illegals, not aliens. No, it's aliens.
Turns out it's both.
I think I just picked it up because I really, really like the cover art. And the Free Comic Book Day issue 1 cover art might be different than the issue 1 cover art that's on the on the website.
I think it's the same actually. It's like a purple cover with a border crossing on it.
Yeah, like at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, like it's such a if I were to see this scene during the day, I mean it's the US border in Mexico. It's a barren desert. It's not very pretty, but I can frame this. This is just such a beautiful, well-colored scene. Like how does it not draw you in? Whew.
Yeah, the book is pretty as hell. Like, and moves really well in a way that I think I'd almost like describe as like an animated movie. Just the way, especially because we talked about how like the pages are landscape, right? So like it's a completely different way of like trying to work the reader's eye across the page, right? Like you've got to work them left to right, top to bottom, but it's like wider to get them left to right and a little bit like harder to get them from like the corner that's on the far side of the page to the one that's back on the like near left, I guess. So, but like it's effortless, it feels like to me. And there are definitely pages. There's a page in issue 2, especially where Oscar's like going through the spaceship and then the alien thing like spits out in his leg so his wound isn't open anymore. Like that page, you can just like track it from the bottom of the left page or the bottom left corner, like across the top of the page, back zigzagging down a little bit, and then across. And like it's really smooth, and it is wild to me that it can be that smooth, even though the aspect ratio is completely different than a normal comic page.
Sure.
Something else that might be important to mention here for anyone thinking about reading this is the fact that fully half of the comic is in Spanish.
Yeah, we haven't actually talked about that, have we?
Oh yeah, like the main conceit of the
Yeah, the whole like the fact that half the book is like unintelligible to people who don't know how to speak Spanish. Unintelligible is an extreme word for it because there's a lot of
the gist, I think.
Yeah, I would say so too. And like I think the fact that you get the gist as well as you do says a lot about the power of like visual storytelling in comics too.
Sure.
I was kind of curious about how you guys read that part. Like, did you just try to read it through the first time, or did you have translate software up right alongside it so that you knew what they were saying the first time, or do you know Spanish?
I mean, I took 4 years of Spanish in high school and I haven't really touched it since. So I got like the very basic of what Oscar was saying. But
I was gonna say, like, Kat, I think you have a pretty good understanding of how poor my Spanish is based on the time we spent in Spain for our honeymoon, where I had to like try to get you to order breakfast for me, but then you kind of bailed, so I was just like jamón y queso timidly.
but no, I still haven't translated those parts because I sort of feel like going to Google Translate and going line by line sort of breaks what the authors were going for.
Like it's kind of the point of the thing, right?
Yeah, like the whole point is you don't need to understand exactly what Oscar is saying to sympathize, to empathize with what he's going through and the awful like events that happened to his family. Like I felt just as much for Oscar as I did for Liddy and her horrible things that happened with her husband. So I think that worked, and I didn't really need to know 100% what was said.
I would really like to know. There's a scene where I guess Ice just rated them, and he's like, "Que leche," which translates literally to "how milk."
I thought we did look that up, and we like.
What does it mean?
Oh, let me look it up again.
Well, in that article I read with Brian's interview, they also said that the Spanish they used, they fit in a whole lot of Honduras like slang.
Oh, good.
Yeah, the whole idea was that even if you could read Spanish, you would still not quite understand what was being said.
Yeah, so I think the whole thing there is like, is it Marcos Martin? He's from Spain, right?
We'll have to double check that one for the show notes. I don't remember honestly.
But I don't think any of them are from Honduras. So I was wondering if it was, the local kind of Spanish they speak there, because man, there's so many different dialects and words. It's like I can't understand Irish people sometimes.
So I think what we settled on it might mean was like thank God, like an idiom like that kind of means thank God, but like on that same page the second translation is no direct translation, which is how language works, right?
They're watching Ice raid the caravan thing. Huh.
I mean, but they made it out, right? I think maybe that's it. Like
It doesn't look very thankful in that picture. But yeah, that's true. I also like, so the second issue starts with, it's just like this random one-off thing of the government sees their blip on their radar and is like, oh no, what was that? Oh wait, maybe it wasn't the second one. Well,
No, it is the second one.
one of them has the government in it, and they're doing that. And like, man, as someone who is a government contractor, I can tell you that scene was pretty legit, and that they have their own acronym slang that really is its own language. Because
So it's kind of harder to understand them than Oscar, right?
A little bit, yeah.
yeah,
But it's also speaking the language of science fiction. Like there's always that scene in an alien drama. It's like, oh, what's on the radar? Oh my god, I've never seen anything like this. Like that's a scene you've seen in so many films. So
yeah. And honestly, that's kind of one of the things that usually serves as a barrier for me to get into science fiction is that when you're inventing whole worlds, there's a lot of different made up, I guess, words that you sometimes go along with it. And I have a hard time getting behind all that.
sure.
I guess fantasy too, but this one was not the case because everything was kind of difficult to understand.
You don't speak primary color?
Oh
Yeah.
man, I want to get to that, but I don't want to jump too far ahead yet because like there are actually a couple neat bits in issue 1 that I wanted to make sure we talked about.
Oh, you
before
want to
we
go
move
in
on to-
order through some sort of like plot of the
Oh,
story? Is that
okay,
what you're
yeah,
saying?
I get it, Pat. Well, I just don't want to like have to jump back and forth. That doesn't make any sense. So as the two stories of Lydia and Oscar are like syncing up,
Mhm.
there's literally a barrier between them on the page. Like their stories are happening on each side, and there's like a big panel in the middle. And as they're coming together, that shrinks until basically like you hear Oscar scream, and it's in Liddy's panel, and at that point, it's their stories have joined up. That's a sweet visual trick to me of like showing the space between the characters and how it's slowly like how there's slowly less and less space between them as Oscar makes his way to the US. Super cool. And I thought it was worth calling out because I think there's a lot of cool experimental stuff in here that I would guess is mostly Marcos Martin based on the script and like the back matter we get in issue 3, the silent issue, where like Brian K. Vaughan has provided a script and Marcos Martin has like used the general gist of it, but kind of like completely revamped it. So I thought that was super cool. And I also really like that the landscape orientation gives Marcos Martin the chance to do that like full page splash panel with the train coming from left to right with the guy like draped in the American flag on top of it. Because
really
again,
liked
just
the
the
train.
orientation of the page is what lets you do that. And that's super cool. So
Sure. I was
I would
more
guess
impressed
that's
with
very
the
much
giant
them.
spacecraft, but trains are cool too, I guess.
The train was sweet. And like I just appreciate the fact that like they're using the unique space like and orientation they gave themselves to do something that like you wouldn't be able to do as well in a like a vertical orientation comic as opposed to a landscape.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's just me. We can move on to issue 2 now.
Trains are cool.
Military speak, also cool.
Yeah. You were saying, Matt, in your in your notes that you weren't a big fan of that part of it.
It was one of the weaker
Which part?
sequences to me. The military part at the start of issue 2, like I kind of get why it's there, and it's still a neat bit that like the military speak is a different language. Like, isn't that neat? But like, I don't know that it needed to be there. So like, I don't know. Just in our notes, like we have like, hey, what are the parts of the book that didn't
I
quite
think
work
it
for
needs
you? And
to
like
be there.
overall, the book's fantastic.
It
Yeah.
establishes that the world that they're coming back to isn't one that's under invasion. It's one where they like saw something weird, it disappeared, they didn't really pursue it, and it sets up the story of the fact that the thing is nowhere near Earth anymore.
That's a good point, actually. The fact that like the spaceship has jumped way the heck away from Earth, and like there's no telling whether they're going to get back or not. That's a part of the story that does need to happen for sure. But
Yeah, I mean the next 3 pages are like psychedelic Doctor Strange kind of space.
yeah, to the point where like those pages to me, like, have you guys? This is a weird question. So like, have you guys read a motion comic before?
I don't believe so.
I mean, like watched a movie.
So it's a different thing. So a motion comic is like strategically built to use. Oh, cat like an Emily Carroll comic might be close to it, where like the comic is built to use like the digital medium in such a way that like you can see the panels moving, and they're built to move that way.
What?
So
well, no,
the-
like in comicsology, you can like zoom in to a point where the entire screen is just one panel, and then you can like swipe left or right, and it does
Yeah,
like a
it'll jump from
transition
panel to
between them.
panel. And the like what I'm talking about is a little bit more intense than that actually, where even within like the same panel, quote unquote, like the character will move. Like if
Oh.
someone's like hitting someone with a staff, like the staff swings, but it's still mostly the same panel, right? So it's like almost animated. So the reason I bring it up is because Pat, I had asked you like whether this like the digital version of this comic does stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, right? It's just a PDF, you said?
Right. It's still images.
I feel like it easily could, especially in the panels where like you go. Issue one's got a good example where it's like on Liddy, it says her name, and then she like moves over to the left, and then it shows where she's from in Texas in the next page, right?
Sure,
Like,
yeah.
I could easily see that as being like a motion comic-esque, like Liddy, her name, she slightly moves over, and then the
Fade in.
thing fades in behind her, right?
Yeah.
Which is, and like I haven't bought a panel syndicate book before, so I didn't know if they do that kind of stuff or if they don't do that kind of stuff. So like I was not surprised that it doesn't do that, but like I feel like just because again the way the book is so smooth and it moves so well, I think I wouldn't have been surprised if it does do some of that stuff because I think it could pull it off really well.
Sure, I could see that.
But I'll link a example of like what I mean in the show notes too. There's a lot of Mark Waid stuff on. I think it's Thrillbent is his site where he used to do a lot of those. So I'll link it in the notes, and I'll send you guys a link after this too, probably because you might be interested in it because it's neat. It's just like I couldn't figure out whether this book was doing that or wasn't doing that, and like you said, Pat, it's not. So
yeah,
that makes sense.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, now we're in space.
We've been abducted.
One of the other things that I really like about this book, and just part of the reason I don't read a lot of comics that are about superheroes and stuff, is that the character design rather is just more real world. Like it isn't a bunch of supermodels with boobs the size of watermelons. It's like Oscar has a unibrow and Liddy has actual thighs, and everybody looks different, and they have recognizable physical features that make them different. I just really appreciate it when artists let people look the way that people actually look.
Look like people? Yeah, it helps.
Yeah, instead of, like Power Girl, come on.
Every single time with you and Power Girl.
She's the most egregious example of how...
I mean, you're not wrong. How did you feel about all the cool like plant and animal references that went into making the aliens, which I think are in the back of issue 2? They're in the back of either issue 2 or issue 4. There's like a bunch of Marcos Martin's like photo references, and I meant to ask you about that off mic, but I guess I'll do it here because maybe it'll be an interesting conversation.
Oh, well, I will say I didn't notice his... Oh, I see them now. Yes, when I was looking through these, part of what makes the aliens so good is that they're drawn from things that you see on this planet in our strange world of a lot of it looks like macro photography and plants. So like before I noticed these things that are in the back of issue 4, you can see his reference notes. You'll see like, oh wow, I see a barnacle, I see a rib cage, I see a seed. And the poppies, especially. There's a poppy seed head that they draw on for one of the monsters that is just right on. Man, you can see it. It's really, I think part of what makes it so good is that the art draws from real botanical influence.
Yeah, I figured you'd appreciate that because it's something that I know you do in your own work. Like you put a lot of time trying to reference things so they look, I mean, not photoreal, but at least like they both fit within like the world you're creating, and also like they come from the real world, so there's something that's inspired them and they fit overall. There
are patterns that you see that kind of repeat across biology, like how a network of veins might look pretty similar to a network of roots or a network of fungal hyphae, which is a fancy way of saying mushroom roots.
The golden ratio and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, that sort of thing too. So it was really interesting to just see how, what happens when you blend animal and plant, or animal and fungus, and put them together. You get interesting art forms.
Yeah, and these aliens do feel very...
You can say alien.
Well, alien for sure, but like very biological. They aren't machines. They all have like sinew, and like look like plant, or they look like, I don't know, some crustaceans or something. They look like animals as opposed to some sort of like robot.
Yes, and one of the things that's kind of a pet peeve with me in terms of science fiction is that the aliens, I mean, okay, some of this is probably like TV shows have a budget.
Sure, they're all humanoid.
Always. They all happen to speak English, and like, I don't know. I really like the fact that they look totally strange and weird, and they don't look like like humans at all.
They definitely don't speak English.
Yeah, there's everything that science fiction usually resorts to, they don't here.
For sure.
So outside of the end of the issue, I think my favorite bit in this issue is when Liddy's trying to tell Oscar that they're in space, and she basically just resorts to saying the word Star Wars, and then he gets it immediately.
Well, yeah, it's going back to like the universal things that are understood, like Coca-Cola, KFC, Star Wars. Like,
There's that bit, and then there's the bit where like Oscar's trying to explain that he's from Honduras and not Mexico, and that they're different countries. You stupid,
Yes.
stupid American.
yeah, she's worried that he's part of a gang, a Mexican gang. He's like, what? No, what? No, I'm from Honduras. That's not the same thing.
Obviously. Yeah, so this issue is the issue they kind of meet up, and we start to like Liddy starts to sort of experience the story the same way we are, kind of, in that like neither of us know what's going on, and also we can't really understand Oscar.
Yeah.
Or I can't, at least. I'm sure other people can to varying degrees. I guess, Kat, I don't know if you answered your own question about like how much of the Spanish in this you did or did not understand too.
Yeah, I mean, I understood probably a little better than basically what they were saying. Like I don't know a lot of Honduran slang, so this is something that actually, yeah, when I was going through it, I did look it up. If like the que leche thing, I was like, what? What's that? But for the most part, I feel like I understood it. I didn't, on my second read through for this podcast, I didn't re-look up some of the words I didn't know, but the first time I did. So I basically did get like the straight up translation of what all the Spanish scenes are. Because I don't know, one of my pet things to do is learn languages, and I've been trying to improve my Spanish fluency for a long time. So I really like languages. I think they're kind of fun. They're kind of like games where you have to learn the rules of them. So this for me was another reason that I really like Barrier as a way for me to practice my Spanish, where a lot of the Spanish that I've tried to read, like outside of, internet blogs and whatever, is kind of inaccessible for me because it's a long story if you're trying to read a book or even a magazine. But this one had so many, like it kept switching between Spanish and English. It seemed it was in easier pieces for me to be able to understand.
Sure. That makes sense.
What was that book you were trying to read in Spanish that you had the English version of for like ever? Was it Love in the Time of Cholera?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, that seemed like it was going to be a slog. Did you ever make it through that?
I made it through the English one.
That's fair.
I still have them together, maybe someday, but that's a tough one in English, so it's pretty tough in Spanish too.
Did you learn how to speak color by the end of this comic book?
Oh, I wonder if there was a pattern discernible or if it was just sort of randomly chosen.
Oh, there definitely was. You can kind of figure it out in issue 5. Like it's sort of emotion based.
Yeah, that's what I got.
Emotion/subject matter based.
Like when they're angry, it's more red.
And like when they're talking about death, it's black.
Yeah.
In issue 5, there's a scene where they all swap languages and then they have their backstories. And Liddy's backstory is in color ease.
That was the one part that I was tempted to translate the Spanish, because Liddy's is in the alien language, Oscar's is in English, and then we get to see the backstory of the aliens, and they're speaking Spanish.
The exact choices of which being to have speaking in which language in that language swap bit is exactly correct, which is awesome.
I'm pretty sure my Spanish translation of it is good. So if I get it wrong, for anyone who actually knows Spanish better than me, I'm sorry. But basically what they're doing, they're standing on the surface of their world and surrounded.
Like their oceans are dying, basically, is what I got.
So it's a mom and her kid, and they're like, oh crap, our world's dead. We need to find a new one. We need a cure for our world. And then the one alien's like, we can't, there's nothing. we can't cure the world. So then the first alien's like, well, I don't care if it's illegal. We're going to go to find a different world then that'll cure our world.
I mean, what's great is that I basically got the gist of that. Like
Yeah.
the art, it's there, and I caught at least the words that I realized that yes, this is a parent and their child that are talking. I got that, and like the relationship between these, like, I don't know, the leader aliens compared to like the more monstrous looking ones. It seemed like they were pets. Like in one scene, they seemed to like bend down and greet one of these aliens or monsters when they get on the ship. So I don't know, it's really cool. Like this section in particular really helped illustrate like you don't need to actually know what's being said to understand what's happening.
Yeah, and it was kind of maybe a prescient message with climate change being a thing. Like this is a pretty realistic thing that we could see here in the planet, like body of water with a bunch of dead fish. I mean, we're seeing it already in some places
Sure.
where the water has been taken away. So their answer here is not like, oh, we should have managed our resources more carefully. We'll have to be careful with the ones that are left because there isn't anything left. So instead they're like, well, let's just go ruin somebody else's life. And then they do, which is kind of what we do.
I don't know if they're trying to ruin someone else's life. They're just trying to live.
And that's what we do too. We're not like, yeah, I hate squirrel. Well, okay, some people they do hate squirrels. I guess some of the things we do, we're not like actively doing it because we hate animals, but it's just kind of what happens anyway. So this was kind of interesting because in this one, we're the animals, and they're like, oh, we'll catch these critters and dissect them, and if it doesn't work out, we'll try a different planet. It's kind of like, oh, hey, wait, maybe you don't do that.
I did really enjoy that Liddy, who we have understood the most through the story, gets like the least comprehensible speech bubbles because she gets the color speak, and then the aliens get speech bubbles that we can kind of understand finally. Like they're much better than the color speak, but still not quite comprehensible if you're not a Spanish speaker.
Right, but I think if this was made primarily for an English speaking audience, that those choices were the correct ones.
Yeah, because then you get Oscar, who we haven't really been able to understand in English, finally, which was super neat too.
Yeah.
Man, I just like freaked out at the end of issue 2 when the color speak was initially revealed because I have not seen, like, I've read a lot of comics and I don't think I've seen that before, and it's such a neat trick that I can't believe I haven't seen it before in like 25 years of reading comics or whatever I'm on now.
What's also interesting that like the fact that it's such an alien language that it makes Liddy's ears bleed when she hears it. Like it's so incomprehensible that our biology rejects it.
Can't even handle it. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's pretty alien.
Yeah, which leads into the fact that like issue 3 is the silent issue, not because it actually like has to be silent, but because like they wouldn't be able to hear each other anyways because their ears are bleeding.
Yeah.
You kept calling it the silent issue. I was like, what is he talking about? But
there's no dialogue. It's the silent issue.
Yeah, wow. I just noticed that there's no dialogue in it.
Which is why I had to read it like 4 times because you know how I am. Like if I go through it and I'm just looking at the pictures, I'll fly through a comic book. It's just the way my brain works. And if there's no words, like I think the first time I read that issue, I probably read it in like 5 minutes flat, I would bet. Which is doing a disservice to the story and the art. So I, of course, went back and reread it. And I did that this time, too, where I think I read that issue probably more times than the other ones, just because, like, my brain will just rapid fire through anything that doesn't have words. Like, I take it in, but I don't take it into the level of detail I should.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed that I was mentioning, I think before we started recording, is that all the different individual issues and after all the like extra bits with the sketches and what have you with a little quote from it, and usually they're from Oscar, but this one was just ... which again should have been a clue to me that there was no dialogue in it.
I mean, it's easy. It's honestly easy to miss. I think part of the reason I definitely remember it is because, like I said, I looked at those process pages in the back of that issue, which are Brian K. Vaughan spelling out the script to Marcos Martin, and then it's Marcos Martin's like thumbnails, I think. And at the start of that bit, he's like, all right, Marcos, here's the silent issue. It's even more on you than it normally is. And in those, like, from the script to the thumbnails, like usually the amount of panels is roughly the same, but the actual storytelling of like what happens and in what order is completely different, which is why comics are wild, because the writer wrote one thing and the artist did something not completely different, but very different, and it's the same story that the writer wrote. It's just organized differently in a way that makes more sense to the artist. And that's why I'm trying to describe how, like, who contributed what to a comic is terrible and at the same time very hard.
That's interesting. I don't think I have the back stuff, the interstitial.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's
scenes.
only stuff they put in the single issues, because like they really wanted to make these single issues special. And some of the interviews I was reading of, like, again, they wanted to do the thing that they did for Cat, which was make it super exciting to go into the comic shop and get these single issues every single week, which again, I think they succeeded like immeasurably, because Cat was in a comic shop every week, or I was in a comic shop for Cat every week, which is not something that happens.
Sure.
But I think that's part of like putting the extra value and getting people into shops, was kind of adding this extra stuff in the back too.
Well, this was originally digital, right? It was digital to begin with.
Yep.
And
yeah,
then,
I think it was online for a couple years before they printed it, actually.
Yeah, and it was only recently in the past, 2018, right, is when it came out.
Yep.
And it was a pretty big deal. Like, they were making a big deal about the fact that it was moving from a digital space to actual physical copies, and how important that is for the story that this comic book is telling. And, the political climate that we live in these days.
I was going to say the political climate didn't change drastically, but certain truths about it were revealed, I guess. I don't know. Like, it becomes a little bit more relevant of a story from 2016 to 2018 or whatever,
Well, it's just reading some of the reviews, like, because it was a free comic day issue, the first one, lots of people were not happy with not understanding half of the comic book. Like, that was a thing most people seemed to have a problem with.
I thought it was so neat. You lose things when you translate it. Like, even the best translator, you're going to lose things. And this is like, you don't have to worry about it. If you want to translate it yourself.
Well, I think people, it being America, and we speak English in America, right?
That's really disappointing to hear.
I know. I was disappointed when I read the interview where they said people had problems. And then, I read, what is it, Goodreads or whatever it is, where you can read people's reviews.
Reviews and stuff.
Lots of people were like, yeah, I liked the parts that I could understand.
Oh, that sucks. Because like,
you missed the entire point of this comic book.
It's part of the reason I love this book, is because it makes you think. And it, like, again, I can just breeze through a comic and like I look at the pages that are in Spanish especially, and like I kind of have to slow down, and I kind of liked that. I kind of liked being asked to work a little bit for my story.
Well, that's the beauty of comic books, is it's not a written medium. It's not just pictures. It's a combination of the two. And when one fails you can rely on the other to get, like, it's more complex than
especially in this book. Like, I could maybe understand that criticism a little bit if the pictures didn't hold up and like tell the story themselves anyways, but they definitely do here. So it makes no sense to me that you have a gripe with the book not telling you the story in a way that makes sense to you.
Right. Yeah, it was disappointing.
Oh, there was a little section in here somewhere with the two little bugs. Was that in the fifth one?
I think that's in the last one. Yeah, it's the opening of 5, I think.
Yeah. So there's an earth fly, and then it gets eaten by this funky not earth fly, and then they both get stepped on anyway.
I mean, which again is the same thing you were talking about, I think, where the aliens have shown up. They're kind of dicking around with humans, but like both of them have a much larger problem to contend with, which in our case is climate change.
Well, yeah, and it's also the story of like insects, like flies, and whatever that alien equivalent of a fly is. Yeah, it's alien. Yeah, it did a weird thing to that fly, but at the end of the day, you squish them because they're just pests. Like, there's commonality there.
That's not...
Sorry.
He's not saying it's right. He's saying that's what happened.
I mean, Oscar had no idea. He just killed a fly, whatever that thing was. He just kept going. So
I thought it was kind of sad.
It was sad.
It is a little bit, yeah. Because they do, like, that fly is reoccurring. Like, in the first issue, I don't know if it's the same fly, probably not, but there's a fly in that. And when they get abducted, part of the creatures that are also being lifted up are all the bugs and worms and
yeah, I assume that snake that was next to Oscar in issue 2 was like the same snake that bit him because I assumed that's what happened to his leg. I'm not honestly sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's what happened.
Oh.
He like fell in there.
I thought an alien did it. That's interesting.
Well, no, because his leg was already hurt when Liddy found him before they.
Yeah, but it was all bloody and stuff. Huh.
But yeah, that one scene when it's Liddy and Oscar stare at each other when they're getting beamed aboard and all like grasshoppers and everything are being drawn up with them. It's pretty cool
Patrick,
shot.
did you hate that scene? As someone who doesn't
Not my
like
favorite.
anything?
That millipede, I didn't like it.
Oh, I'm an entomologist, so I was all like, "Ooh, there's a grasshopper and there's a earthworm, couple of flies."
Oh, you guys.
It's real gross.
Yeah, so issue 3 is the silent issue.
Yep.
Issue 4 is the one where issue 3 ends with them setting fire to the drawings, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because Liddy lights up a cigarette and the alien craft or the aliens themselves like freak out when there's a flame, which makes sense. You're in space. You don't want an open flame in your spaceship.
Do you guys think Marcos Martin drew those children's drawings with the like super appa and like Oscar's just like incredibly dense unibrow?
I will say it's really hard once you've like really trained yourself to be a good artist. It's pretty hard to draw like actual kid stuff. Like maybe if you use your left hand, but even then, like you can kind of tell. I think an actual kid drew that.
I wonder if Brian K. Vaughan drew it.
That would be funny.
No, I have no idea though. But I distinctly remember Oscar's eyebrow from those pages.
I do love Liddy's like, oh, I understand, it's really cute. And then she like holds her arms open and there's like open space behind her. And it's like,
again,
fun.
That's why I have no clue how you could take issue with the story's ability to tell its own story. Because the body language in those 3 panels convey sarcasm.
Like, that is so really cute. That I love it, but read the room, Oscar.
And the panels before that where she's like, did you draw that?
Is that you?
I just think she was asking whether it was him, but I do kind of like this universe you've created where she thinks that he's so bad at art that it's his.
I thought that she thought he drew it. He's
like,
I'm going to be a superhero.
Because he does show her the tattoo he has of the kids.
Yeah, I assume she meant like, oh, is that supposed to be you? And he's like, yeah, this is my kid. But I also love the alternative fiction where she thinks that that's his level of artistic ability.
No, you can't have this. It's my awesome comic book. But yeah, so they burn the journal, and that causes the aliens to freak out and flood their prison, which allows them to escape.
And issue 4, I think, starts with a little bit of Oscar's backstory, which is like maybe the hardest to understand bit of the thing, although it also, I think, is easy enough to get the gist of.
Dude, they're playing soccer with a human head. You get the gist.
Yes, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
But after that Oscar intro thing where they're like in the water, I guess, is it Munsa Vicente that did the colors in this?
Yeah.
Man, this comic series has maybe the best coloring I've ever seen. This is from someone who hates coloring. Like,
as a concept or at doing it?
The colors are just
I hate doing it. Like I think it's amazing, and I think it's really make or break for just about any comic is how your colors look, which is unfortunate that I hate doing it so much. But wow, like the colors in this, and especially that panel where they look wet and kind of psychedelic because they're in water. Like, my God, that just mondo respect. That is so good.
So the thing I kept keying in on throughout the issues, and like the colors are wildly good, and there's so many, like, again, even with that, like the neat tricks of like the word balloons, the blue-red shift in issue 3 when they're lighting stuff on fire. But then like the number one thing that I noticed throughout was just like how more tired and sunken each of the characters looked throughout, because you could just like see it in the bags around their eyes and like the bruises they would get and stuff, like, which is all coloring. So like that was super cool to me, like being able to watch the characters progress through the story and get a little bit more haggard, and like that's included in the storytelling is pretty neat.
Sure. I mean, I also liked, the psychedelic watercolors of like the cosmos and stuff. But yeah, the bags under the eyes are also pretty cool.
Okay, do you see, like, I really actually, like, psychedelic colors, very cool. They're good. A lot of people can do those. There aren't as many people who
can do bags with the eyes.
I mean, but who would like take the time to do it and like use it as part of the story to show you the characters progressing? I think is super cool. Whatever,
Sure.
Pat. Agree to disagree.
I'm just saying, man. The title page of issue 4, or is it 5, where it's the spacecraft in front of like a nebula, is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty good. There's no bags under the eyes, but it's pretty
And like
good.
Kat was saying, when they're in the water, like the fact that the water with all the bubbles looks so different from everything else is very cool. But yeah, they bust out of the prison and they find like a grove of alien trees, which I was all about. They're pretty cool.
And this is the bit where they end up finding that lady who's been skinned, right?
Yeah, dissected
Yeah.
obviously to be studied.
I don't think she has been dissected or even studied. I mean, they just took her skin.
Well, I would assume they take the skin. I mean, if you have a specimen, wouldn't you start with that, right?
Why do people cut deer's heads off and put them on their walls? I don't know.
I'm gonna say I'm gonna defer to the scientist on that one, actually.
I mean, it doesn't look like she's been damaged other than the fact that her skin is missing.
Which is a pretty big damage, to be fair.
Yeah, but I mean, like maybe they were interested in her muscles or something, but
I mean, they did that with the horse too, right? So something they were
Yeah.
like somehow studying the anatomy of. all
Yeah,
the
if you're
things
going to
they're
understand
picking
the
out.
anatomy of a creature,
I think we
skin
just
doesn't-
have to know more about whatever that it is that they're looking for to help their planet.
Yeah, it's hard to gauge what they're actually looking for because we don't get like a big deep dive into that isn't a language that most of us understand.
like I was wondering if like her blood and like fluids were feeding that grove of trees. Like the fact that those trees are there are because that she was vivisected.
Those are some pretty big trees for that to be the case.
I don't know.
Maybe they really like human blood. They only need a little bit to grow a lot.
Maybe.
Who knows? But it's cool.
Like milk for children,
Que leche, as they say.
as they say.
Okay, wait. Ew.
So I think this eventually gets to like what's probably like my third favorite dialogue bit in the
Yes,
comic,
I think it's the same thing. Yeah.
where Oscar's got the big inspiring speech, right?
Yeah, because Liddy's like found a rope. It's like, you know what? I found my way out.
I mean, she's seen a person who's been skinned. And then
No,
she
I don't
finds
blame
that
her
she's
at all.
like,
This is like really messed up. And she doesn't want to be skinned and left on a table. So yeah. And Oscar's like, I don't understand what he's saying, but he obviously has
I
lots
mean,
of passion.
I
behind
think
it.
I did Google translate some of that this time, but like even without that, you kind of get the gist, right? If he's like, no, we can't. We have to go on living. Like we
Yeah,
have to
the
live
fact
for
where he's like,
ourselves, for our loved
You want
ones.
to kill yourself because of this? Like, if my people did that every time we found a mutilated cadaver, San Pedro Sula would be a ghost town. Meaning, like, this ain't no thing.
Damn, Oscar.
But yeah, like Liddy's like, I have no idea what you just said.
Which is not the reaction you want to your inspired we have to live speech, right?
Right? Oh, it's great.
That bit was real good.
One of the monstrous aliens shows up and Oscar just like takes a stick to him. He's had it.
At the end of it, this is what he says translate roughly to take us to your leader.
Oh, yeah,
Home
that's what
to
it says.
leader? Yeah, yeah.
That's neat. That's a good one. That's a good gag.
Well, then Liddy smiles at him when he says it because she knows exactly.
Yeah, I think she got that one.
Yeah, Liddy's got a little bit of like Chewy to his Han, I guess, whereas he doesn't quite have it the other way around.
It's surprising to me that Liddy lives on the border and does not know any Spanish.
She
Like,
knows
really?
an
Yeah.
amount. She can't like I think Liddy and I are actually in a very similar spot to where she knows an amount. She can kind of understand things that are said to her, but
Really?
she can't speak it.
To me, it seems like she knows absolutely no Spanish.
No, because she knows like some bits of it here and there. Like she knows to smile at that. She kind of understands when he's like, "Hey, I'm not like, what country do you think I'm from?" Like,
Oh, yeah. Of course, I'm going to level with you here. Honduras is also an English word. It means Honduras.
fair.
What? Outrageous.
But I think she knows enough to understand the gist of certain things, but not enough to understand inspiring like, "Hey, we should stay alive" speeches.
Yes, they use their alien hostage to negotiate terms with the leader aliens.
Yeah, which is eventually where the big telepathic roundup happens, where they all kind of connect up in issue
Moving
5.
into issue 5, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting like scene when the aliens like shove their tentacles into Liddy and Oscar and then like crash their brains into each other. It's really interesting. Like the designs of the aliens are proper alien. Like it's weird.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit grotesque, but also fascinating and also beautiful. Like that's nature summed up, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you're like, ew, should I be looking at this?
I do think this is a bit too where like the neon colors that you were talking about, Pat, definitely carry a lot of the story too, especially in that scene where the text bubbles get swapped that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Like that page is completely sold by the colors. So yeah, and then we get everyone swapping their stories with each other, and then we get the bit where Oscar thinks they're finally dead. Like he thinks that's what happened. Like everyone swapped stories and the aliens didn't really care still and they're gonna die, and that's what Oscar thinks is happening until KFC.
And did you guys see that the aliens were holding the jar of KFC when they were in the last scene in the ship?
Oh no,
really?
I didn't actually.
What? Oh
And
yeah,
then he's
they are.
like, how do you keep going, Oscar? In the foreground, they're just like, "Ooh, here's a KFC. Let's take them wherever this came from."
We'll just send them back here. They just found the first one they could. They're like, that looks good. It's all the same anyways.
There's one more leg in the bottom of this. You want it? No, it's okay.
They learned, and yet they didn't learn.
That's actually super awesome that they just found. Well, they probably just found the first one and were like, "Oh, this is where they came from," because it's all the same stupid giant ball to them.
I do really appreciate the fact that this story told a man and a woman, they don't fall in love with each other. There not
Yes.
a romance between the two. It's really refreshing that Liddy doesn't fall for Oscar or vice versa. Like they're just helping each other through a really awful time.
Especially given how recent that stuff that happened to Oscar is, it would be rather inappropriate if they decided
Right.
to turn it into
Yeah.
romance.
It's like good.
Yeah, that's pretty rare to find in stories in general, and especially I think in science fiction stories. Like, I think the last thing that I saw where that happened would have been, what's that movie about the sci-fi robots that are in the monsters and they're fighting each other?
You're gonna have to be a little bit more specific.
That soundtrack.
Oh,
is
Pacific
like-
Rim.
Pacific Rim. Yeah, the last time I saw that would have been Pacific Rim. You can cut out my singing part.
No, we got to keep it. Also, I'm pretty sure the leads do fall in love in that movie.
No, they don't. If there's a sequel, maybe they fuck it up. But in the first one, they don't.
I
Oh,
believe
no,
they do.
they totally
actually.
do. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, they don't. They don't kiss at the end. And it was like, oh, that's really nice. They just are like friends.
Well, you know what? This gives us an excuse to rewatch Pacific Rim, which I'm super stoked
The
about.
first
Actually,
one. Never ever watched the second one.
Yeah, I was really disappointed that was not good from what I read because I really love the first one. But
I
I'm
know.
digressing at this point.
This is not a conversation about Pacific Rim.
I don't think Guillermo del
Rim's
Toro
really
was
good.
involved with the second
Yeah.
one, which is
He
probably
wasn't.
why. Guillermo.
Anyway, there's just sort of like that thing that I think is maybe a toxic part of our culture, that men and women can't hang out with each other without, some sort of weird sexual tension. And it was nice to see that, hey, guess what? That's not necessarily true.
Yeah, it turns out a lot of other stuff's going on in this book, and there's really no time for that, even if it was a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another reason I don't want them to ever like write a sequel to this, they'd probably, I don't know, maybe they're better than that, but maybe they'd like make it about sexual tension. They're like a couple now trying to make it across the Middle East.
Yeah, I could see if someone else picked it up. I could see them doing that.
No.
Which they won't, which is good.
Which is good.
Or you know what?
Which
That's
is
what
good.
the fans can do that in their heads, and it's a fanfic. But when it becomes canon, I'm like, ugh.
So yeah, that's roughly the end of the book, right?
Okay, so should we wrap up with some closing thoughts about the book? It seems like we've gone
We've reached the
over.
end.
Yeah.
I thought it was a very good story, told very well. So thank you, Kat, for recommending it, because there's no way I would have picked it up otherwise.
You're welcome.
So I wanted to ask, Kat, is there a comic or even like another book or any other media thing that you've kind of felt the same way about since this, where you were like, I got to get that next chapter, and I got to get it now.
Giant Days.
That's true, actually.
Giant Days has been the only comic that since then that I've discovered sometimes I discover things late. So that's what happened with Giant Days. It's been out for a while and I just kind of burned through 7 or 8 trades of it.
I think we are up to 11 trades of it.
Oh,
actually.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like Pat gifted us an Comixology gift card this year, and I'm pretty sure we used 75% of it just on catching up on Giant Days. Because
Nice.
the gift was to both of us, and I was like, well, this is the most appropriate thing to spend it on then. Is to just buy the rest of Giant Days that's out right now.
But I'm not necessarily ending my discussion of this comic with a recommendation for Giant Days. Because yes, Giant Days is amazing and I love it. But if I was to recommend comics based more specifically on, this is Barrier. If you like Barrier, you might like blah, blah, blah. I would say that I would end it with a plea to the comics industry to can we maybe do another serial that's going to be less than 10 issues? Because I don't know of any that are coming down the pipeline, but this is something that I really enjoy as a format. And I think it could be a breath of fresh air for comic stores, physical comic stores, which I would really like to have stay around.
So it's actually kind of weird for comic stores to have to order something weekly like this, especially, and again, like weekly and also a limited series is sort of weird because the
Kind
way
of a
comics
risky
work,
business
like you have to
proposition,
order.
huh?
Yeah, like you have to order, I think, like roughly 3 months ahead. And so for this, there's no sales data, right? By week 2 of how many you sold of issue 1. So like,
Well,
you
also
can't-
it's free online. How do you judge
well, there's
that?
that too, right? So like, that's a thing. But it's just like, by the time shops would have gotten all of the new comic book day issue 1s in and seen how many of those they even gave away, they would have had to have their orders in for like, I think basically the entire series at that point.
I'm just saying that historically, whatever they're doing, like their clientele seems to be shrinking. And okay, you could end up doing whatever to meet sales quotas because you could be like Barnes and Noble serving beer and chicken to get people in your bookstore now or whatever. But
That's
I think
a wild take on what Barnes and Noble does, by the way.
I'm just saying, I give it a couple years. I'm sure they will be. That this is people like quality, at least for the most part. I think that's true. And they can tell when something has good quality. They'll go to something that's bad quality if they're doing it out of allegiance to characters they like. But the reason they like those characters is there was something that was good quality to begin with. And this is something that could get a completely new demographic of people into comic stores because I am a guinea pig for this. I mean, I don't really go to comic stores that much. I'd super wanted to all the time when this was coming out. So it could be, I would like to see something in this format again. I would say, as far as recommendations, something that's a self-contained story where you really can't read the next one, and also a fun adventure. The Choose Your Own Adventure Deadpool it came out about the same time, and I really, really loved it. Or for strange one-off stories, the Barrier issues have a lot of advertisements at the end about Private Eye, which also reads sideways. And it's been a few years actually since I've read that, but I remember it being odd and unique and thoroughly enjoyable. So I would recommend Private Eye.
To go back a little bit to talk about the weekly comics thing, I think I completely agree with you that I really love the format, and I think it's something that comics could have on other media that it doesn't currently. The only other place that can really do that at this point is a Netflix, I guess, to that level of quality, where you've got a book that's like this, where as long as you give the team enough lead time, they can drop a new issue that's super good every single week. I think getting people to understand, to change their buying habits in that way would be interesting. But you saying that when the quality is there, people respond is definitely true, because this year there was a weekly X-Men miniseries where the X-Men have been kind of middling for a while now, and everyone was talking about that book every single week, and it came out weekly. It was 12 issues and it was done within 3 or 4 months, and everyone loved that book and was raving about it, and people were in their shops, and shops sold a ton of it. So if you can make a book that's as consistently good and comes out each week, I think readers will respond. It's just tough for shops to be able to
And
buy
then it has
into
to
that.
stop because people don't want to invest endless amounts of money in it either. Like, having an end date, I think, is important.
Yeah, the miniseries is kind of like seeing a resurgence too, which is sweet because I'm on the same track with you at this point where I don't want to buy 80 issues of Batman and not have the story end. Like I'll buy a 12-issue Batman story and like it's the same writer and artist throughout and I'm going to read it and it's done. And like that's a lot of where my taste lies at this point. So like I think it's cool to see that from like from your point of view where like this was the book that got you the most excited about going to a comic shop that I think I've ever seen you, and that was really sweet.
Although again, part of it was Choose Your Own Adventure Deadpool was out at the same time, so they were both very exciting.
Yeah.
Matt, you got any recommendations?
I think I would probably point you toward Paper Girls, actually, like which is another Brian K. Vaughan book, and like I said, it recently wrapped up. Just because I think the art is very similar, like in style. Like Cliff Chiang is sort of the same. Like it's different, but like sort of the same school where it's very cartoony and animated movie-ish, and like the colors are roughly like similar too. And it's a BKV book, so it's gonna be good. And then the other thing I was thinking about is there's 2 issues of Amazing Spider-Man that are by Marcos Martin, and Mark Waid's the writer on those. And it's just like, if you like superhero comics and you liked this comic, I think you will like those 2 issues of Amazing Spider-Man because they're beautiful. And like Marcos Martin draws a dope Spider-Man. So
Nice.
Those would be the 2 things I think I would recommend.
Very cool. Because you want me to give my recommendations, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
I would say, while reading this, the comic that it reminded me most of is We Three, which I have recommended way, way back in the day.
Oh, is that it with the dog?
The dog, a cat, and a rabbit.
Oh.
I think back in the day I compared it to RoboCop meets Homeward Bound.
That sounds like something you'd say.
Yeah. It's the whole, it's animals as opposed to humans and their language barrier, but lots of no dialogue scenes illustrated wonderfully by Frank Quitely. It's a Grant Morrison comic. So if you're a Grant Morrison fan, pick it up. It's awesome. Lots of the same feels I got reading Barrier. I also got reading We Three. And Cat, it's a 3-issue miniseries that has a complete story. So you might like it too.
I have read it. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, cool.
All right. I think that's going to do it for this month's discussion of Barrier. As always, if you want to get in touch with Pat or me, you can find us on Twitter as @thehypnotoad and @MattLedge, respectively. You can also email us at waitingonthetrade@gmail.com and read more comics-related goodness at mattreadscomics.com. Kat, you're going to be stopping by there to write a guest post soon, right? About the process of doing that 1-page comic that you did for the Kieran Gillen art experiment?
Yeah.
Of course.
I'm super excited for that, actually. I saw you like taking pictures of that as you were doing it, and you were showing me pictures of your setup and the page as it was coming together, and I saw you doing the thumbnails, and I'm really excited to like see you explain your process because I think that'll be super neat. All right. Well, thanks again to Kat for coming on to talk Barry with us.
Thanks, Kat.
Thanks,
You're
Kat.
welcome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be. Oh, shit. I did it again. What do I say that's cool? What do cool people say?
If I figure it out, I'll let you know.
Back at ya. Okay. No. You're welcome. Thank you.
Perfect.
Cool.
Join us next time for something a bit experimental as a whole group of us get together to talk about the recently released and aforementioned House of X and Powers of X from Marvel Comics.